Hi guys, welcome to this Rider by Mechanic session. Here we're delving into the efficiency of a rider's mechanics in the saddle and under motion aligned with the horse's mechanics. I very wonderfully have, she needs no introduction, Shannon Peters here, who is Grace's trainer. Shannon trains all her own horses and has ridden and rides at the Grand Prix level. And Grace has so nicely agreed to be taped up in the saddle here as a demonstration purpose so that we can do some education for our riding community. The first taping technique that we're going to look at is this taping technique, which is going around the anterior portion, the front of the pelvis, and attaching the pelvis to the back of the saddle. Now, if you can see here, what this is actually doing is it's throwing her pelvis into a little bit of a posterior tilt, and that is encouraging her thoracic block to be behind her pelvic block, which makes her constantly chasing her movement. And then you can see in the video when we look at the motion, Shannon will talk to you a little bit about what this does with the horse's way of going.
Well, you know, our job as coaches and our job as trainers for sure is to create a place in the saddle for the rider that they can influence the horse as much as possible in the most positive way. So when you are attaching parts of your body to the saddle, it really doesn't matter what parts you're attaching, you're then setting the movement a little bit against the horse. And certainly against the rider's biomechanics in that department. So that's, you know, our job is to create this as best we can. And of course, there's lots of tools to do that. But some of these things certainly set the rider in a little bit of a backwards motion with the horse.
And I think it's important here to talk a little bit too about the mechanisms that we use for taping and what we're really trying to influence. And you'll see in a lot of sporting athletes that there is a lot of athletes that use tape really effectively and efficiently. Most of it is for either influencing a muscle to work a little harder or to decrease the working load of the muscle. But when we're going across joint structures, we're actually doing what we call a mechanical taping, where we're affecting the skeletal structure. Taping is going around the abdomen of the rider, or the lower abdomen of the rider, around the front of the hip. This is called the ilium, and it is attaching to the back of the cantle. Now, for purposes, I've just put it down the base of the pelvis here, but it's actually on the cantle of the saddle. Now again, this is not a true proprioceptive taping under kinesio tape. This is another mechanical taping technique because you're crossing joint structures and you're fixing to an immobile surface, being the saddle. Now what happens with the pelvis in motion of the saddle? The pelvis actually moves in 6 different planes of direction. And the most important really when we're riding is the sagittal plane. So you want the pelvis to have this ability to move front to back. Now, if you're drawing the pelvis into the back of the saddle mechanically towards the cantle, even if you did tape off, so you still had this 15 to 25% stretch force on the kinesio tape, you're still structurally bringing the pelvis backwards into a slight posterior tilt. Now you can see when you do that posterior tilt, where do the lower legs go? The lower legs cannot hang directly under you. They naturally want to go to the front, and look what happens to the thoracic block in the upper body. If this is structurally aligned and your symmetry is aligned here, you're at the most efficient state. I draw your pelvis into the back of the saddle. You're behind the movement now of your horse, and your loading structure comes onto the back portion of your seat bones. You want to be sitting efficiently in the saddle directly under that middle portion of the base of the seat bone. If we tip you backwards, you're now loading your structure on the posterior aspect of your seat bone, and you end up driving your horse down into the ground through the front. It cannot lift its back appropriately up towards you. In this motion too, you're also then disengaging your lower abdominals, and you're increasing an engagement through your rectus abdominis closing the structure down through the front of the rib cage. Important component here is a little bit the taping that we're talking about along the axial skeleton. So axial skeleton being this vertical line, and we're going from her head, and she's attached at the back here down towards the cantle. And then that creates a little bit of this extension dysfunction in the vertebral structure all the way from the occiput down to the sacrum at the base here. We're using taping to either facilitate or inhibit the activation in a muscle group. You're going to go just across and through the muscle group, and normally always the tape is applied directly onto skin to have a neuromuscular property. Now when we're talking about coming along the axial skeleton, in this instance we're taping from a bone to the back of the saddle, being the back of the cantle. Now that makes the tape not a proprioceptive input, that makes it a mechanical structure or a mechanical input of taping. Even though it's not directly applied to the actual skull of the human, it's applied to the helmet. Now the helmet sits on top of the skull. When you apply a force from proximal to a distal portion at the cantle of the saddle, that force load is pulling from the top to the bottom. So even if you were just tape off, you're creating 15 to 25% stretch, which means you're creating 15 to 25% pull load all the way from the occiput down through the spine before you get to the back of the cantle. Now in this positioning, you're making the vertebra, or you're telling the vertebra that they want to have some extension component, because the pull of the tape is pulling from the top down towards the bottom, telling all of these level of your vertebral column to pull backwards. Now when you create more extension in the back of the vertebra, especially when you're sitting in the saddle under load from the horse, you're creating an increase in pressure in all of these facet joints on the posterior portions. That loading structure increases that direct force load all the way up through your spine, all the way to the base of the occiput at the top of the head here. Now, if the reasoning behind why you're doing this taping is, oh, my rider keeps looking down, I'm trying to tell my rider to look up, you need to delve a little bit deeper. Number one, you need to figure out, why is your rider actually looking down? Possibly they have a disengagement of their longus colli muscles through the front of the neck, so they structurally cannot support themselves through their stabilizers, which causes the head to always tilt and look down. By applying this force load, which you're thinking is telling the rider to remind to come back up here, when really it's just pulling at the joint structure, you're not talking to the muscles or the stabilizers at the front of the neck, which are disengaged at all, and you're only affecting that axial skeleton. The next one, the last one that I want to talk about, and Shannon can talk a little bit here about importance of connection towards the bit with the horse, is what this tape is doing, which is going from behind Grace's back down to her hands.
Yeah, we, especially in the walk, of course, it is the most that we follow a horse's neck, but the structure of the upper body and the stability of the upper body has to be stable enough that the arms can independently go with the horse within the exercises, go with the withers, with the neck, with the mouth of the horse. So you're not really wanting to restrict how that happens by restricting how much the elbow can go forward.
And we can take a little look at that too. Grace, can you show us there how much you can actually take your connection towards the bridle there with your hands? And so you can see that's not really a lot of motion. I would like her, ideally, to be able to have more range of motion than that, so that she can follow her horse wherever she needs to.